We welcome all viewers of Freedom TV channel. Thank you for being with us. This is the main news at this hour. In the studio, Yuri Kulinik. Hello? Ukraine needs a just peace, and only Ukrainians will decide the future of their country. This is what President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated in his address on the occasion of Independence Day. According to him, Ukraine is not waiting for gestures of goodwill. It acts of its own will to ensure a reliable and lasting peace.
This is Ukraine, which can truly stand up for itself. This is Ukraine, capable of gathering and uniting world leaders around itself in just one day. Ukraine, with which America and the whole world want to produce drones. Ukraine, which has restored the unity of Europe and the USA and is now the foundation of this alliance. It stands its ground and can defend itself. Ukraine, which stands firm and can defend itself. That's why Ukraine is heard and respected. People listen to it. Its place is at the table. No one tells it, wait outside the door, but instead says, the decision is yours alone.
Ukrainians are marking the 34th anniversary of their country's independence in battle. For 12 years they have been fighting for freedom, and for the 4th year they have been repelling the full-scale Russian invasion. This was stated by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi. He noted that the Ukrainian people will never submit and will never give up their independence. Syrskyi also emphasized, independence is the work of the strong. It is not given, it is defended.
True independence is impossible without a strong and modern army. Our military pays a high price for the people's right to be free. We remember every fallen hero. I am confident that we will defend our independence. Its best guarantor is our military. Every brave soldier, sergeant, and officer. Oleksandr Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Ukraine is receiving Independence Day greetings from world leaders. For example, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy posted a letter from White House head Donald Trump on social network X. The American president noted that the time has come to put an end to the war.
The people of Ukraine have an unbreakable spirit, and Ukraine's courage inspires many. On this important day, know that the United States respects your struggle, honors your sacrifices, and believes in your future as an independent nation. It's time to put an end to the senseless killing. The United States supports negotiations to reach an agreement that will lead to a strong and lasting peace, ending the bloodshed and protecting Ukraine's sovereignty and dignity. Donald Trump, President of the United States.
Today, our country marks the 34th anniversary of independence, a day when every Ukrainian understands the true cost of freedom and the independence of their nation. For more on the atmosphere in Kyiv and how the capital's residents are celebrating this day, Yulia Agranovska will tell us. Yulia, I greet you and also congratulate you on this momentous day. Please tell us how the capital will be celebrating this day.
Yura, greetings to you. Right now, I am at a place that is symbolic for Ukraine, especially on the 34th anniversary of Ukraine's independence. This is Independence Square. I want to note that the atmosphere in Kyiv is festive. At the same time, each of us remembers and values those thanks to whom we can walk peacefully in Kyiv today. These are our defenders. For 11 years, the Russian Federation has been trying to take away our rights, freedoms, statehood, and independence. However, all their attempts have been in vain. The Ukrainian spirit is unbroken, and Kyiv was not taken in 3 days. We asked the residents of the capital what independence means to them. Let's listen.
For me, Independence Day is the opportunity to choose, the chance to do what I think is right, what is best for me and my family without being forced.
It's the unity among all of us and a celebration of our state. For me, it's independence.
For me, it's the ability to make decisions on my own, to express my will, and to live my life independently.
Looking at what's being taken care of. Looking at what's happening around us, looking at the thousands and thousands of memorial flags on the Maidan, you might ask, where is that independence? Where is it, really? But each of us must say to ourselves, independence is within me, independence is within you. We need to understand that in this way, we are shaping our national independence. We firmly believe that a Ukrainian is the kind of person who, over centuries, has developed such a strong character that independence, even in these terrible conditions, lives within me, within you, within our nation.
I want to note that in Kyiv, mass events were cancelled for safety reasons, but there were some targeted events dedicated to Ukraine's Independence Day, in particular, the annual Vyshyvanka Run. I also want to mention that today, high-ranking officials visited the capital, including, in particular, the Prime Minister of Canada. It's worth noting that this is his first visit to Ukraine in his new position, and on such an important day for us. Other visits from high-ranking officials are also expected. Yura, happy Independence Day to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Take care of yourself. And we look forward to more updates from you, and to hearing how the capital is celebrating this day. Thank you. We were joined by our correspondent Yulia Agranovskaya. She told us how Ukraine's Independence Day is being celebrated in the capital. The first official visit took place at the Central Railway Station in Kyiv. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney was welcomed by the head of the President's office, Andriy Yermak, and Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Andriy Sybiha. Carney will take part in the ceremonial events dedicated to Ukraine's Independence Day. He also posted a congratulatory message to all Ukrainians on his Facebook page.
On this day 34 years ago, Ukraine declared its independence from the Soviet Union, and Canada was one of the first countries to recognize Ukraine as a sovereign state. Since then, Canada and Ukraine have been strengthening our long-standing friendship, based on shared values of peace, security, and democracy. More than 1 million Ukrainian Canadians call Canada their home. That means every triumph and every tragedy on Ukrainian soil is deeply felt here, by us. Canada's support for Ukraine is unwavering, and we stand with you every step of the way in your fight to defend your sovereignty and realize your dreams for your country. Happy Independence Day, Ukraine! Glory to Ukraine!
Glory to the heroes. It's also worth noting that the U.S. President's Special Representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, has also arrived in Kyiv. He is, in particular, taking part in the celebrations for Ukraine's Independence Day. In Donetsk and Luhansk, Simferopol, Sevastopol, Henichesk, Melitopol, and Skadovsk, cities temporarily occupied by the Russian army, members of the resistance movement Samalka burned dozens of Russian tricolor flags. This movement emerged in 2023 in Melitopol, which is occupied by Russia. Its members are women. They joined forces to constantly remind the Russian occupiers that they have no business being on Ukrainian soil. Larissa Petruk will tell us how Ukrainians have fought and continue to fight for their freedom and independence.
Kyiv, autumn of 1990. Hundreds of students gather in the city center. Their posters read, "Hunger striking against the government." The protesters demand that a new union treaty not be signed, that the head of the Ukrainian SSR government resign, that parliamentary elections be held on a multi-party basis, and that Ukrainians be banned from serving compulsory military service outside of Ukraine. This large-scale protest would later be called the Revolution on Granite.
Of course.
The biggest dream of everyone who joined the revolution on Granite was the Declaration of Independence. But to say that openly at the time would have meant risking your entire future if things didn't work out. That's why the demands were more specific. The student hunger strike, that's what we called our protest, was centered on Independence Square, which, by the way, was then called October Revolution Square. We set an example that a Ukrainian can be free on their own land, that they can make decisions and inspire others not to be afraid to stand up for their beliefs.
After decades of mass repression, Ukrainians once again showed their willingness to fight for their freedom. On October 2nd, 1990, students from different cities across Ukraine set up dozens of tents here. On the first day of the hunger strike, 108 people declared their participation. Soon, another 50 joined them. It was an emergency, not just on a Republican, but on a union-wide scale. At first, they tried to persuade the students, then to intimidate them, but it was all in vain. On October 17th, the parliament voted to fulfill most of the protesters' demands. In the early 1990s, one after another, the former Soviet republics began to leave the Kremlin's orbit. On July 16, 1990, the Supreme Council of the Ukrainian SSR adopted the Declaration of State Sovereignty of Ukraine, and on August 24, 1991, the Active Declaration of Independence of Ukraine. The blue and yellow flag was ceremoniously brought into the Ukrainian parliament for the first time. The vote for the Active Declaration of Independence was on the verge of failing, as the majority in the Supreme Council were communists. While debates continued in the hall, thousands of people gathered in the square in front of the parliament, demanding the restoration of Ukrainian independence. The chairman of the Supreme Council of the Ukrainian SSR, Leonid Kravchuk, put the question to a vote. At 5:55 p.m. Kyiv time, 346 deputies voted in favor.
At home, everything was turned off. At home, everything was turned on. The TVs, the radio, there was no internet like we have now. We listened to every word and watched as some hesitated and others did too. I understand how hard it was for each person to make that decision for themselves.
On December 1, 1991, more than 90% of citizens supported the act adopted by the Verkhovna Rada in a referendum. Such an independent and sovereign Ukraine was completely unacceptable to the Kremlin.
Putin had already shown his negative attitude toward Ukraine, literally just 2 steps away from the presidential chair. In December 1999, right after Kukma's victory in the elections, everyone expected that Kukma would make a visit to Moscow after winning the elections for the second time. Kukma pursued a multi-vector policy. He flew first to Paris, to France, and then he went to the United States. Putin was extremely displeased by this and practically imposed an embargo on energy supplies to Ukraine.
The conflict around Tuzla Island is often called a precursor to Russia's war against Ukraine. On September 29, 2003, Moscow began building a dam from its Taman Peninsula toward Ukraine's Tuzla without any warning. The Ukrainian military issued a warning. They said that if the border was violated, they would open fire to kill. Russia did not respond. Leonid Kukma, the president of Ukraine, interrupted his visit to Latin America and arrived on the island. The Russian builders had only 102 meters left to complete the dam. For several weeks, Putin avoided speaking with Kukma, but after receiving a call from the island, which was ready to defend itself, he gave the order to stop construction. The relative calm in relations between Russia and Ukraine did not last long. Just a year later, in the fall of 2004, large-scale protests began in Kyiv and later in other major cities of the country, triggered by massive fraud in the presidential elections, where Viktor Yanukovych, the Kremlin's protege, was declared the winner. The exact number of participants in the Orange Revolution is unknown. Experts estimate it was in the hundreds of thousands. At that time, the Kremlin launched a full-scale disinformation campaign in Ukraine.
Back then, Russia had significant economic influence over Ukraine. It also had informational influence, control over mass media, newspapers. In 2004, branches of major Russian newspapers and websites were opening in Ukraine. And, of course, this came as a surprise to Moscow. Moscow significantly pressured President Kukma to forcefully disperse the Orange Maidan protests by using force. But Kukma understood that this could end badly for him as well.
Viktor Yushchenko won the victory, but in 2010, at the next elections, pro-Russian forces in Ukraine managed to take revenge. Viktor Yanukovych became the head of state. Viktor changed the country's foreign policy. Yanukovych declared Moscow the main ally and partner. The last straw was the government's refusal to sign the association agreement with the European Union. And once again, it was the students who were the first to protest. The night of November 29th to 30th, 2013, became a turning point in Ukrainian history. The Berkut units forcefully dispersed the protesters. Ukrainians responded to the repression with a massive uprising. The Revolution of Dignity began. In the 20th of February, it became known that amid the mass protests, Yanukovych had fled the country to Russia. The Verkhovna Rada stripped him of his powers. And in February 2014, Putin gave the order to carry out the operation to seize Crimea. Real power on the peninsula was seized by armed men in military uniforms without insignia, the so-called Little Green Men. Despite mass protests by local residents against Crimea joining Russia, the Kremlin held a sham referendum and declared the peninsula its own.
Ukraine became, some kind of obsession for Putin. That is, he wanted to punish it. And we saw this in the stirring up of anti-Ukrainian sentiment. We saw it during the gas war of 2008 to 2009. Excuse me, could you introduce yourself, please?
Road, please. Why? Because you can't. If, for example, we talk about the Crimean Tatars, then 95%, if not 99%, supported the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which they demonstrated in 2014, starting with the rally in February 2016 and continuing to this day. That is, the Crimean Tatars are suffering there because of their stance.
Immediately after Russia occupied the peninsula, mass repressions began in Crimea. Russian security forces kidnapped and arrested those who were against the annexation. People were often persecuted based on their ethnicity. The victims of Russian repressions were the Crimean Tatars. Tens of thousands were forced to leave their homes. Among them is Ismail Kurtumur.
First of all, I was born in Ukraine. I don't know any other country. This is my homeland, my land. Secondly, I didn't want to live under Russian rule, that's for sure. We can start with the fact that I am a Crimean Tatar. I didn't experience it myself, but my grandparents still remembered the deportation. And they told me about it. I heard it from people who lived through it. It might sound cliché, but at the very least, what happened in 2014 was unfair. And I felt that injustice. Let's put it that way, I longed for justice.
The date considered the start of Russia's armed aggression in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions is April 12th, when dozens of militants with Russian citizenship seized administrative buildings in Sloviansk. Everything followed the same script that had been tested in Crimea. A forceful takeover of power and sham referendums. Kyiv announced the start of an anti-terrorist operation.
In 2014, among other things, Putin was once again afraid that he would suffer another defeat in Ukraine. That Ukraine would finally break free from his embrace. And I think he was already prepared in 2014 for a full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
After 8 years of fighting in certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, Moscow began a new stage of the war. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This time, Russia wanted more, to destroy Ukraine as a state. The main target of the aggressor in February 2022 was Kyiv.
I
met that day in the Carpathians. It was my vacation. It took 2 days of hell to get to Kyiv. All the roads were just jammed with traffic. It was impossible to even head toward Kyiv. Cars were lined up 2, 3, even 4 rows deep on the opposite lanes. Sometimes we made our way along the shoulders. I had already heard that the enemy was near Demidov. The enemy was near Irpin. I believed I could be useful here, for myself and for others.
Before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Trofim Ivanov worked in the city council of Vishhorod, Kyiv region. In the first weeks of the war, like tens of thousands of Ukrainians, he became a volunteer.
And
Then it was like Groundhog Day. It was constant, 24-hour work. There was no bread in the city, no fuel either. All the stores were closed, there were provocateurs, explosions could be heard, and something was burning somewhere. There was always some kind of work to do, 24/7. Negotiations everywhere about humanitarian aid for the city, and so on.
When the Russian army was driven out of the Kyiv region, Trofim decided to join the National Guard of Ukraine.
I was.
Assigned by the Vyshhorod City Council until the end of the war. But I made the decision myself that I wanted to serve specifically in the National Guard of Ukraine. I passed the medical commission and joined as a regular soldier.
Ukrainians did not greet the Russian army with bread and salt, but with mass resistance. Putin's blitzkrieg failed. Russia has become completely bogged down in the war against Ukraine. Millions of losses and a crisis in the Russian economy. International isolation, pariah status, and being labeled a criminal. The Russian dictator still cannot come to terms with it. He can't accept the idea that he won't be able to occupy all of Ukraine and take away from Ukrainians what they value most, freedom and independence.
For me, the independence of the country is what many generations of Ukrainians have dreamed of. It's something that was nurtured as a dream, and something I was able to help make a reality together with my friends and the people I share this time with. It's something very, very personal.
4.
Me, independence is, above all, the freedom of my children in their own homeland. I'm not even talking about them being able to move around freely, but about them being able to live on their own land, make decisions on their own land, and influence the development of their country.
For me, probably first and foremost, it's the ability to think freely, to speak freely. That's what I feel here, and also to act freely.
Meanwhile, in the territories occupied by Russia, underground fighters and partisans continue to risk their lives fighting for Ukraine's freedom. The defense forces are destroying the enemy not only in Ukraine, but also deep in the Russian rear. Ukrainians are fighting, working, and studying, and most importantly, they continue to live and love on their own land, in their independent Ukraine. Larisa Petruk, Ruslan Balazarov, Dmitro Borsh, and Alexander Khan for Freedom TV Channel.